The bullet that killed Sergeant First Class Aaron Tibbs didn't come from where anyone expected. It came from a ridgeline nobody had bothered to clear because the intelligence package said the ridgeline was empty. And in Korengal Valley in the fall of 2019, you trusted your intelligence package or you trusted nothing at all. Tibbs was the third man the Korengal Wolves had lost in 14 months. He wouldn't be the last. The fighter who put that round through his throat was gone before the echo finished rolling across the valley, and the man who'd set up that shot, who'd read the terrain and the wind and the afternoon light and chosen that ridgeline precisely because every American assessment said it was empty. That man had been studying the wolves for 6 weeks. His name was Petrov, and he hadn't missed in 3 years. Master Sergeant Dale Crone received the assignment 3 days after Tibbs's funeral. His team was down a sniper, down a sergeant, down whatever you lose when you bury a man who knew how to make you laugh on the worst days. Command sent him a replacement. Her name was Staff Sergeant Iris Vael. She arrived at Forward Operating Base Kessler on a Tuesday, stepping off the logistics helicopter with a Pelican case and a rucksack that looked like it weighed more than she did. Crone watched her from the motor pool. She was 31, medium height, with the kind of build that didn't announce itself until you saw her move. Economical, controlled, nothing wasted. Her hair was regulation. Her face gave nothing away. She carried the Pelican case in her right hand and didn't put it down when she stopped to check her bearings. Crown's senior NCO, Sergeant First Class Marcus Greer, appeared at his elbow. "That's her? That's her." Greer made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "She looks like she works at a bank." Tibbs looked like he coached Little League. Greer didn't have an answer for that, which was the point. Crown had learned a long time ago that the ones who looked the part were usually the ones who'd spent all their energy looking the part. He wasn't sure yet what Vael had spent her energy on, but he intended to find out. The briefing room at Phobe Kessler held 6 men who had worked together through 3 rotations, through firefights and ambushes, and 1 vehicle rollover that should have killed 2 of them and somehow didn't. They moved like people who'd stopped having to think about each other. When Vael walked in and found the only open chair at the far end of the table, nobody acknowledged her. It wasn't hostility exactly. It was the specific silence of people who were waiting to see what she would do. She sat down. She set the Pelican case against the wall. She folded her hands on the table and waited. Crown watched Greer, because Greer was the one who usually said the thing everyone was thinking. Greer said it, "So you're the one they sent us." Vael looked at him. "Appears that way." "You know what happened to the last sniper assigned to this team?" "Tibbs, Key October 14th. Single GSW upper right thorax exited through the trachea." She paused. "I read the after action. Reading about it and being here are different things." "They are," Vael agreed. "You're right about that." Greer had been expecting pushback. The agreement seemed to frustrate him more. Petrov's been working this valley for 2 years. He's not some local shooter who got lucky. He's Spetsnaz trained, he's patient, and he specifically targets coalition snipers because he understands Overwatch doctrine. He will come for you. "I know. You've never been in Korengal. First time for everything." Greer leaned back in his chair. "You want to know what I think?" "Not particularly," Vael said without any heat in it at all, "but you're going to tell me anyway, so go ahead." The room went quiet in a different way. 2 of the younger specialists, Trent and Bascom, exchanged a look. Crown kept his expression neutral. Greer studied her for a moment. "I think Command sent us someone they could spare." Vael nodded, slowly, as though she were considering the point from all angles. "That's a reasonable thing to think." She reached down and unlatched the Pelican case, setting it on the table, and opening it toward herself so no one else could see inside. She studied whatever was there for a moment, then closed it again. "I'd like a full terrain brief for the valley and access to every patrol report from the last 90 days. I want Petrov's shot history mapped by location, time of day, and light conditions." She looked at Crown. "When's the next operational window?" Crone said, 48 hours. "Then I've got 48 hours. She picked up the Pelican case. "Where do I bunk?" Nobody answered immediately. Then Specialist Bascom, who was 23 and had not yet learned when to stay quiet, said, "Down the hall, last door on the left." He hesitated. "You want someone to show you?" "I'll find it." She was already moving toward the door. "Thank you, Specialist." After she was gone, the room stayed quiet for a moment longer than it should have. Trent said, "She doesn't seem that impressive." Crone looked at him. She knew Tibbs's wound track from memory. She asked for Petrov's shot data sorted by light conditions. He let that sit. When's the last time you asked for light conditions before an op? Trent didn't answer. Find her, the patrol reports. 46 hours later, Crown found Vael in the tow sea at 0400, working through a topographic overlay with a red-lensed flashlight. She had Petrov's confirmed shot locations marked in order, numbered chronologically, and she'd drawn lines of bearing on each one. The lines didn't converge on a single point. She'd expected that. Instead, she'd organized them into clusters based on the angle of shadow at the time of each shot. Crown poured himself coffee and stood beside her without speaking. He's not hiding, Vael said without looking up. He's choosing. Every position he's used gives him a shadow backstop. He fires from shade into light. The target is always illuminated, he's always obscured. He doesn't need perfect concealment. He needs the contrast. Crone looked at the overlay. The pattern was there once you saw it. He hadn't seen it. Tibbs was hit at 1642 local, he said. West-facing ridgeline, late afternoon. He was backlit by about 20 minutes of full sun. Vael straightened. There are 4 positions in this valley that give Petrov that geometry the next 72 hours, depending on where we're operating. She tapped 2 of them. These 2, if we run the route command wants. He'll pick one of them based on wind. You can predict which one. It wasn't quite answered it anyway. I can narrow it down. She picked up a printed weather sheet. Northeast wind tomorrow afternoon. 11 knots, gusting to 17. That rules out the eastern ridge. Crosswind exposure. Too much drift correction for a first shot. He'd be here. She pointed to a position on the western valley wall. Or here, if he's had time to prep the alternate. Crone studied the map. That's a hell of an assumption. It's pattern analysis. She turned to look at him directly. You don't have to trust it. But if I'm wrong, you haven't lost anything except one afternoon of not sending your team into a valley where a man has already killed 3 coalition soldiers. If I'm right, if you're right, we know where he is before he fires. Yes. Crone looked at her for a long moment. In 22 years of service, he had learned to read people the way some men read terrain. Vael didn't read like someone performing confidence. She read like someone who had already done the calculation and was simply waiting for the world to confirm it. Brief the team at 0600, he said. Greer's objection at the 0600 brief was loud enough that Trent quietly moved his coffee away from the table's edge. You're telling me, Greer said, that we're going to alter our patrol route, the one command approved, because Vael thinks she can predict where Petrov is going to position himself based on the angle of the sun. Shadow contrast, Vael said. Not just sun angle. I don't care what you call it. Greer looked at Crown. This is a real operation in a valley where we've lost 3 people. We don't have the luxury of running experimental pattern analysis against a Spetsnaz operator. The pattern isn't experimental, Vael said. It's in the data you already had. I just organized it differently, and if you're wrong, then we proceed with the original route, and I accept responsibility for the delay. She looked at him steadily. But you'll be operating in this valley without knowing where Petrov is positioned, same as always. My analysis doesn't make your situation worse. It might make it better. Greer shook his head. She's been here 48 hours. She's never operated in Korengal, and she wants to predict the movements of a man who's been hunting in this valley for 2 years. He looked around the room. Does anyone else see a problem with this? Bascom kept his eyes on the table. Trent looked at the wall. The 2 men who hadn't spoken, Sergeant Vael and Specialist Cruz, both studied their coffee. None of them said yes, none of them said no. Crown let the silence run for a moment, then said, Vael takes the overwatch position she's identified. We proceed to the objective, execute the patrol, and extract as planned. Any questions? There were none. Greer put on his kit in silence, and for the rest of the morning he didn't speak to Vael at all. The insertion went without incident. Crown led the team into the valley at 1430, moving through the eastern approach while Vael and Cruz split off toward the ridge line she'd designated as her position. The elevation was brutal, 1,400 feet of gain over rough ground, and Crown heard Cruz's breathing on the radio channel, labored and steady, as they climbed. Vail's breathing he didn't hear at all. At 1520, she checked in. Overwatch set. I have eyes on the valley floor and the northwestern slope. Copy, Crown said. We're at checkpoint 2. No contact. The patrol moved through the lower valley, threading between compounds that had been empty for months. The light was changing. The afternoon sun was dropping toward the ridge to the west, and Crown was aware of it the way he hadn't been before. Acutely, personally, as a tactical fact and not just a feature of the landscape. At 16:18, Vail's voice came over the channel. Actual. I have a position. Northwest ridgeline, 740 meters from your current location. One individual, prone oriented southeast. Greer keyed his radio before Crown could speak. Visual confirmation? Partial. He's in shadow. I'm working off scope glint and a boot sole. He hasn't moved in 4 minutes. That's not a confirmed ID. No, Vael said. It's not. Crone held up a fist and the team stopped. He looked at the slope to the northwest. In the fading light, the ridgeline was a dark mass against a paler sky. He couldn't see anything. Vael, if you engage and you're wrong, I don't engage until I'm sure. Her voice was the same as it always was. Level, careful, carrying nothing extra. I'm asking you to hold at your current position. Don't move forward. Greer was beside Crown now, close enough that his voice wouldn't carry on the radio. She's going to spook a goat herder and then we spend 6 months in it into the radio. Copy. Hold. 2 minutes passed. 3. Greer shifted his weight. Bascom crouched against a compound wall and watched the slope. The light continued to change. At 16:23, Vael said, he's up, moving to a secondary position. He's got a spotter. I see 2 now, 5 meters apart. Actual. These are not goat herders. Can you engage? Working the geometry. Stand by. 30 seconds. The team didn't move. Crown counted his own heartbeats without meaning to. I have a shot on the primary. Spotter is partially masked by terrain. If the primary goes down, the spotter will attempt to relocate. I'll have a window of approximately 4 seconds before he's in dead ground. Take it. The shot came from somewhere up and to Crown's left, a single flat crack that the valley walls folded into an echo and then swallowed. Crown was already moving his glass to the ridgeline when the second shot came, less than 4 seconds after the first. Silence. Primary down, Vael said. Spotter down. Confirm no further movement. Crone kept his glass on the ridgeline. Nothing moved. Copy, he said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. Team, we're pushing to the ridgeline to confirm. Overwatch. Maintain. Maintained. What they found on that ridgeline 17 minutes later confirmed everything Vael had said and added several things she hadn't. The primary was Spetsnaz, identifiable by his equipment and the particular way he'd prepared his position, pre-range markers. A hide that had been used before, ammunition staged in specific quantities. The spotter was newer, local, but trained to a professional standard. And between their 2 positions, they found a log, handwritten in Cyrillic. Crown photographed every page. Intelligence would spend weeks on it. He walked to where Vael was still set up, still prone behind her rifle, still watching the valley. He crouched beside her and didn't say anything for a moment. She spoke first. Is it him? Equipment matches? Intel will confirm. Vael nodded. She didn't celebrate. She didn't even exhale in any notable way. She just began the careful process of coming off her position, clearing her rifle, running through the post-shot routine, with the same methodical precision she'd brought to everything else. The spotter, Crown said. That was a 4-second window. Moving target 3.8 seconds, she said. I had it mapped. If the primary goes down, the spotter's first instinct is to roll left because the terrain on his right is exposed. I had the roll point ranged before I took the first shot. Crone looked at her. You ranged the point where you predicted he'd roll? Yes. He thought about that. How confident were you? Vael considered it seriously. 70%, maybe 75%. You took a shot at 75% confidence on a moving target at. He checked the range on the ground at 680 meters. The alternative was letting him relocate and report. She met his eyes for the first time since they'd reached the ridgeline. I thought the mass supported the risk. Crone nodded slowly. He had Mortis Ridge before last light. The debrief happened at 2100 in the same briefing room where Vael had sat in silence 2 days earlier. This time the room felt different. The intelligence officer ran through the preliminary findings on the log. It was Petrov's, the shots were his, the methodology was exactly what Vael had identified from the data. Greer sat through the entire briefing without speaking, which was unusual enough that Trent kept glancing at him. When the intelligence officer finished and left, Crown dismissed the rest of the team. He stayed, and Greer stayed, and Vael stayed. Greer looked at her for a long moment. I owe you an apology, he said. I questioned your analysis in front of the team. I implied you didn't belong here. I was wrong about your capabilities. He paused. I'm not sure I was wrong about everything else I said, but I was wrong about your capabilities. And in this work, that's the part that matters. Vael was quiet for a moment. You were protecting your team, she said. from someone you didn't know in a situation where being wrong gets people killed. I understand why you did it. Understanding why doesn't make it right? No, she agreed, but it makes it human. She picked up her pelican case. I'd like access to Petrov's log as it gets translated, if that's possible. I'll see what I can do, Crown said. She was halfway to the door when Greer said her name. She stopped. That shot on the spotter, the pre-ranged roll point. He shook his head. I've been doing this for 16 years. I've never seen anyone think that far ahead in a dynamic situation. Vael looked at him. My father was a chess player. He used to say that if you're thinking about your next move, you're already behind. She paused. I've been thinking about Petrov's next move since I read the first patrol report. She left. The door closed. Greer looked at Crown. Where did command find her? I don't know, Crown said, but I'm going to find out. The days that followed settled into a different rhythm. The team moved differently in the valley now, not because the threat had disappeared, it hadn't. Petrov's network was larger than one man and one spotter, but because they were no longer operating blind. Vael ran her analysis against every new piece of intelligence, building a picture of how the network thought, how it chose positions, how it communicated. She briefed the team every morning, concisely, without unnecessary words. She answered questions without impatience and asked questions of her own that were precise enough to make the other soldiers think about things they'd been taking for granted. Trent, who had said she didn't seem impressive, started taking notes during her briefs. Bascom asked her once, during a quiet hour at the range, how she'd learned to read terrain the way she did. She thought about it for a moment. My mother grew up in eastern Oregon, she said. Ranch country. She taught me to track before I could read a compass. You learn that the land talks to you if you know how to listen. Wind moves a certain way around obstacles. Grass bends in patterns that tell you something was there and where it went. She looked downrange. I got to the Army and realized I was doing the same thing, just with different inputs. The Army didn't teach you that? The Army refined it, but the foundation was older. She chambered around. The Army teaches you what to look for. My mother taught me how to see. Bascom thought about that for a moment. You ever think about what you'd do if you weren't doing this? Vael fired. The target at 400 meters took a center mass hit. She worked the bolt. Sometimes, she said, not as often as I used to. 3 weeks after Petrov's confirmation, intelligence pulled a thread from the log that led to a secondary cell operating out of a village 14 kilometers to the north. The mission to roll up that cell was Crown's team, full package, air support on standby, a route that Vael had spent 6 hours mapping for threat positions. The night before, Crown found her in the TOC again, 0330. You should sleep, he said. I will. She didn't look up from the map. I keep finding something. He sat down. What? The cell in the north. They know we're coming. Not the specific timing, but they know we've been following Petrov's network. There's an indicator in the patrol reports from last week, a pattern shift in their movement times. They adjusted. She ran her finger along the route she'd mapped. They'll have an alternate position here, not the obvious one. Here, Crone looked at where she was pointing. A low fold in the terrain, barely visible on the topo. Easy to miss. Why there? Same principle as Petrov. Shadow backstop, elevation advantage, sightline on our most likely approach. She paused. And because I would choose that position if I were them. Crone looked at her. You put yourself in their position and asked what you'd do. I've been doing it since I got here. She leaned back. Most people ask where the enemy might be. I ask where I would be if I wanted to kill me. He was quiet for a moment. That's a specific way to think. It's the only way that works for me. She hesitated, which was unusual. He'd come to understand that Vael only hesitated when she was deciding whether to say something true and personal. My first deployment, I lost someone because I was watching the obvious position. The enemy had chosen the same position I would have chosen. I wasn't watching it because I thought, somewhere, that the enemy wouldn't think the way I think. She looked at her hands. I was wrong. I've been correcting for it ever since. Crone thought about Tibbs, about the ridgeline that intelligence had cleared, that Petrov had read the same way he read everything, not where the Americans would look, but where the light was wrong. We brief at 0500, he said. Get 2 hours if you can. Yes, sir. He was at the door when she said, the position I marked. If I'm right, I'll have a shot window of about 6 seconds before the terrain masks them. I need you to trust the delay. How long of a delay? 45 seconds from the time you reach checkpoint 3. Don't advance past it until I call clear. Crone nodded. 45 seconds. The operation the next day ran like a machine that had been properly calibrated. The team moved through the approach route, reached checkpoint 3, and Crown called a halt. Greer was beside him, counting under his breath. Trent watched the low fold in the terrain. Bascom moved his selector and moved it back. 15 seconds. 30. At 43 seconds, Vael's voice came over the radio. 2 individuals, the fold in the terrain, 240 meters from your position. Armed, oriented toward checkpoint 4. A pause that lasted less than 2 seconds. Engaging. 2 shots close enough together that they sounded almost like one. Clear. Advance. Greer looked at Crown. His expression was something that wasn't surprise. Exactly. More like the recalibration that happens when the world turns out to be different from what you'd assumed. She called it again, he said. She called it again, Crown agreed. The operation cleared the northern cell inside of 4 hours. No coalition casualties. 3 confirmed enemy K, 2 captured, a cache of material that intelligence would be working through for months. In the debrief, the intelligence officer noted that the cell had indeed shifted its timing patterns in response to what they believed was increased American surveillance. Exactly what Vael had identified from the patrol data. After the debrief, the team moved to the chow hall. Someone produced a bottle of something that wasn't technically authorized, and Greer poured measures with the methodical generosity of a man who took hospitality seriously. He poured one for Vael. She looked at it, then at him. "You've earned it," he said. "I've never said that to a replacement after 3 weeks." Vael picked up the cup. First time for everything. Crone watched from the end of the table and thought about what it meant to be wrong about a person. He had not been as openly wrong as Greer, but he had been uncertain in ways he hadn't voiced, and he understood now that the uncertainty had been its own kind of failure. Vael had arrived with nothing to recommend her except her file and her silence, and she had earned every inch of ground she currently occupied through patience and precision, and a willingness to think in ways that made other people uncomfortable. She hadn't done it loudly. She hadn't done it with speeches or confrontations. She had simply done the work and let the work speak. Later, when the team had drifted off to sleep and Crown was writing his report, he found himself trying to explain to the words on the page what made Vael different. The tactical competence was real and documentable. The pattern analysis was real. The shooting was. There wasn't a precise word for what the shooting was. But there was something else underneath those things. Something that he kept almost being able to name. He finally wrote, "Sergeant Vael does not see what she expects to see. She sees what is there." He looked at the sentence for a moment and decided it was as close as language was going to get. 4 days later, a second piece of intelligence from Petrov's log yielded a name. The name connected to a network that connected to a threat stream that reached beyond Korengal, beyond this valley, beyond this rotation. The intelligence officer brought the file to Crown and told him it was going up the chain, and that there were people above his pay grade who wanted to talk to the analyst who had broken the first piece of the pattern. "It wasn't analysis," Crown said. "It was Overwatch. Sir, the person you want to talk to isn't an analyst. She's a sniper." He thought about it, "And she's mine." The intelligence officer looked uncertain. "The request came from fairly high up. I'll be happy to send her for a conversation. She'll be back for the next operation." He handed back the file. "Tell them she's available Tuesday." He found Vael on the range at 0530 the next morning, as he'd expected, working at a distance that made the targets nearly invisible without optics. She didn't hear him coming, or she did, and chose not to acknowledge it until he was close enough to talk, raising his voice. "Intelligence wants to debrief you," he said, "about the log analysis." She lowered the rifle slightly. "When?" "I told them Tuesday." She was quiet for a moment. "They'll want to use the pattern analysis in other valleys. Apply it more broadly." "Probably. I'm not an intelligence analyst." "No. You're a sniper who thinks like one." He stood beside her and looked downrange. "It's not a common combination." Vael was quiet in the way she was quiet when she was thinking through something carefully. "I'll talk to them," she said, "but I need something in return." "What?" "The team stays intact. Whatever they want from me, it doesn't pull me off rotation." She looked at him. "I know what I'm useful for. Sitting in a basement reviewing signals data is not it." Crone almost smiled. "I told them you'd be back for the next operation." Vael turned to look at him directly. In 3 weeks, he had rarely seen her face carry anything that could be called vulnerability. But it was there now, just a layer beneath the surface. "I know Greer was right about some of what he said, about the fact that I'm new here. That I haven't built what you all have built. She looked back downrange. I'm not asking for trust I haven't earned, but I'm asking you not to let them take me away from the team before I've earned it properly. Crone thought about the 45-second halt at checkpoint 3, about the ranged roll point she'd calculated before she took the first shot, about Tibbs and the ridgeline nobody had bothered to clear. You've already earned it, he said. She didn't answer. She raised the rifle, settled her breathing, and fired. Downrange, a target that was barely visible at this distance took a hit that Crown, when he checked the impact point later, found in a circle he could cover with his thumb. She worked the bolt and chambered the next round. There was still work to do, and morning was burning off fast. And somewhere in this valley, there were patterns that hadn't been read yet, threats that hadn't been named, a darkness that needed someone willing to look into it and tell it what they saw. Vael had found her work here, and the work, in its cold and precise and necessary way, had found her.